The Retirement Cafe Podcast, episode 49, How Money Figures in a Joyful Life with Brian Portnoy.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe Podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and Accredited Later Life Advisor, Justin King.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe Podcast, which is brought to you by Retirement Planning Specialists, MFP Wealth Management. Do you ever feel that there is just too much information and choice today? Behavioural finance expert Brian Portnoy has found a way to achieve simplicity in our world of information overload and shares his perspective in two fascinating books, The Investor's Paradox and The Geometry of Wealth. He tackles the challenges of not only making better investment decisions, but also how money figures in a joyful life. Brian is a keynote speaker, seminar leader and consultant, and I met him at the CZ Financial Planning Conference in Birmingham. So here's my conversation with Brian. Welcome, Brian.
Nice to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So you're at the CZ conference, and you're about to go on stage in, a little bit later on this afternoon. Welcome to the UK.
Thanks. Love to be here. That's great. That's
Fantastic. Great. For those who may not know you, and they're going to know you a little bit better after our chat today, could you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So Brian Portnoy, I am currently the head of education for Magnetar Capital, which is a big investment firm in Chicago, where I live. Over the last 20 years, been in the investment business with a range of responsibilities, all the way from portfolio management and all the way on the other side toward a writing career, where I've sort of found a passion for behavioral finance, writing about human decision making, and help clients achieve better life outcomes.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a CV.
Yeah.
And what are you hoping to? We're at the UK, the kind of premier UK financial planning conference. What are you hoping to educate financial planners on in the UK? Yeah.
So what I've been trying to do over the last few years is flip the script, meaning that what we've done in the asset management and wealth management industry forever is basically start with the money, focus on the markets, and I want to turn that around. I want to start with the individual and the family and what their objectives and goals are, and then think about what it means to underwrite a life that's meaningful to people in their own situation. So I've written a book to that effect, and today I'm going to give a talk called Money, Happiness, and the Future of Wealth Management, because I do think it's difficult for a lot of financial advisors to sort of move their focus, change their business model away from brokerage, selling investment products, to more of a life planning focus.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I work in this space as well, and train other advisors in this. But we talk about kind of lifestyle financial planning, and we talk to people about goals and objectives, etc. But in my experience, if you ask a lot of people, the man in the street, what are your goals? And it's literally like, well, to keep my job and and to pay the mortgage. How do we get people to really envisage, a wonderful, fulfilled life?
Yeah, I think there's an education process. I think there's the chance to show folks that there's a wide range of opportunities in terms of leading a meaningful life, but then to recognize that money fits into that equation, that there's no getting away from it. I think one of the things that people don't think about much, but if they did, they struggle, is that the entire concept of goals is actually quite ambiguous and elusive, because there's something social psychologists write about called the hedonic treadmill or hedonic adaptation. It's this idea that in life, no matter what happens, you sort of get used to it. You achieve a big thing that's positive. Well, the duration and intensity of the happiness that you feel isn't what you thought it'd be. And on the flip side, you have tragedy, you have illness, you have an accident. We tend to recover from that as well. And that makes goals-based planning trickier than it actually sounds. It's one thing to say, I want to save for retirement and have some money put away so that I can travel and stop working. And of course, that's totally fine. What we don't realize is that we experience life very differently than goals on a checklist or dates on a calendar.
Okay. So how would you encourage, I don't know, let's say you were advising a member of your family, how would you encourage them to start thinking about their life and their money?
Yeah, well, it starts with purpose, thinking about, what is your mission, what's really meaningful to you. At any moment in time, that's difficult to do. But then we also need to recognize it gets even harder because we evolve and we change. Our personalities and identities change over the decades, and we need to be aware of that. So, for me, there are some deeper sources of meaning in life related to our connection with others, our sense of autonomy over our life and our story, a sense of competence or skill in our vocation or career, and then being tapped into a broader context, meaning that we live for something bigger than ourselves, whether that be our religion or our nationalism or our sports team. Those are all big, deep conversations, but if we start the money conversation first with purpose, then we can begin to set financial priorities that link back to that, as opposed to where I think most of the industry has been, where most people have been forever, which is, what's the market going to do? Where do I find the next Amazon.com stock? And so forth. And those can be fun and interesting conversations. They're actually quite irrelevant as it relates to the bigger picture questions that I think we should be answering.
Yeah. So working out what you're truly trying to achieve in life before getting the money really is just a strategy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the money is a pathway to get you to places, but we also have to accept, from our two perspectives, that it's hard to think this way. Money is a scorecard, and not just a private one. It's a public one. So we look around us and we see people who have more. We feel envy. Sometimes we feel anger, and I think it's incumbent upon each of us to take the responsibility to define what's really important to us, and at least try to shut out the noise. And I think to the extent that people can do that, they're going to be in a much better place, both financially and emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely. So your most recent book, The Geometry of Wealth, which I'm 2/3 of the way through, haven't quite got to the end.
Okay, good.
I'm thoroughly enjoying it. There's a lot of wisdom there. There's a lot of, could you maybe kind of give us a précis for people who haven't read it yet, of what the main messages are?
Yeah, so most people only read a third of the book, so I give you credit, because the book's based on 3 shapes,
yeah.
Geometry of Wealth, a circle, a triangle, and a square. Most people stop with the circle, so congratulations, you're ahead of the class. The first book I wrote was on investment strategy and investment decision making, and I stepped back a number of years ago and basically said, who cares? And began to think both professionally and personally with aging parents and growing children, well, what does this all mean? So I wanted to write a book in the world of finance that actually touched on these larger issues. So I discussed this concept of wealth, or true wealth, that I define as the ability to underwrite a meaningful life. The shorthand term that I conjured up was funded contentment. And that phrase now seems to be popular. So I wanted to understand what funded contentment was all about. And I created a 3-step mental map, sort of a 3-chapter story that starts with purpose, moves to setting broad priorities, and then ends up with making specific tactical decisions. And the reason that my first shape is a circle is that when setting purpose, we're going around and around, like we're never done figuring out. Life's journey goes in lots of twists and curves. In terms of priorities, my view is that we have 3 broad priorities in terms of managing risk, matching assets and liabilities, and then striving for broader goals. And then finally, there's a square as the final section, and that is back to investment decision making, but in a very simplified way that's not technical, that can help people sort of set expectations for what they're going to be able to achieve in the market.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, one of the things, I've got myself, my wife Kathy, we've got 2 young girls, 8 and 10, and we're watching them grow up, and I'm remembering the advice that my parents, maybe Kathy's parents, gave her about good education and get the exams and off to university and get a good job, and I still don't think that's shifted dramatically. There's no class on finding your purpose.
No, and that's fine. I mean, because I think it's easy to be pedantic about finding your purpose. You know, we could write books on this all day long, but it's such a personal exploration. What I wanted to do, really first and foremost for my kids, and I have 3 teenagers, you know, when it's time for them to sort of move on in college and jobs, and they're kind of thinking a little bit more specifically about the day-to-day and money and things like that, I really wanted to create a script or a narrative for them to think through these things, to give them, you know, sort of mental models, as they're sometimes referred to, that just sort of simplify a very messy and complex reality. And so, you know, I have for most of my life, but, you know, in a very dedicated way over the last 5 years, read in targeted, you know, philosophy, theology, psychology, economics, sociology, and so forth, trying to think through these issues and at least give people an opportunity on their own time and in their own way to think through these things, but then attach it to a plan. Because, you know, the overall argument of the book, this path to the true wealth, is that you need to calibrate purpose and planning. So it's one thing to write a book that's flowery and philosophical. It's another thing to write a really boring book about financial planning and investments. I wanted to create a narrative that connected purpose and planning in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Absolutely. And in my experience, and I don't know whether it's the same for you, but in my experience, if we help clients, or even for myself, once I find the purposeful life that I believe I'm trying to live, actually the energy for the money skills kind of seems to just arrive. Because, you know, if I'm working with someone and they say, oh, I really want to, I don't know, I've thought about starting a business. But, you know, I know businesses fail, and I know, you know, the risks are high, and I've got a young family, and I've got this, and lots of hurdles in their mind comes up about the reasons why this thing is not going to work.
Yep.
But let's say we manage to inspire and encourage them that this is possible.
Yeah.
Often they suddenly start suddenly learning about stuff that they need to get there. Because there is suddenly a reason to understand investments.
Well, there's context. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being in finance and finding stocks and bonds and global markets interesting, portfolio construction, risk management, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've been doing that for decades, and it's fun, it's interesting, and it can be valuable. For most people, that's not what they want to do, for the same reason that, you know, I have no interest in getting a medical degree, but I'm very happy to go see my physician, you know, at least once a year to make sure that I'm, you know, healthy and staying on the same direction. But whether it be, you know, finance or fitness or any other domain, if you can create the context where it's meaningful to you, then everything sort of fits in the right way. If you don't have the context, then it just kind of sounds like a bunch of jargon. Yeah. Because you end up having really dumb conversations about, well, maybe I should have a large cap growth fund in my portfolio. Who cares?
And who knows?
Who knows? Not in the grand scheme of things, not relevant.
No.
At all.
No. And so how often do you revisit your own kind of mission?
Well, the book's kind of forced me to maybe be a little self-indulgent on this, but I mean, the real answer is not that often. I mean, I give this stuff a fair amount of thought. I wouldn't have written the book if it weren't my passion to read and think about these things. But, you know, your purpose doesn't change every day. You know, I have a decent sense of what matters to me now. I've given some extra thought into how I've gotten to this place over the last 50 years or so. You know, what has changed over time. I think it's very instructive to look back and say, okay, I'm not the same person that I was 10 or 20 years ago, and it's going to be impossible to predict who I'm going to be in 10 or 20 years from now. So having that sort of adaptive mindset, I think is really important. And then, you know, the day-to-day is the planning. So I do live the book in terms of making sure that I have that I'm organized, that I have transparency, which is sometimes not good because sometimes you see things in your finances that you don't want to see, right? In terms of lack of funds or imbalance in your balance sheet or your budget or your portfolio. Still, I think a truthful self-rendering is really good, a critically important place to be, and that takes up more time than the purpose stuff.
Yeah. And so our audience for the Retirement Cafe are, they're often people who are actually approaching retirement or are enjoying retirement. And of course, that kind of career thing the purpose there has shifted. What's your thoughts around, that time of life?
I think retirement's one of the trickier and more controversial concepts in modern living, and one that doesn't get as much attention as it should, because we know it's a relatively modern invention. For most of history, people worked till they died.
Yeah.
Or just couldn't, physically couldn't do it anymore. And then we had certain advances in Europe in the 19th century and in the US in the 20th century that created this modern retirement system. And it's not like, sort of the mountains or the trees or the sun or the moon. It's not a natural thing. It's something that we've created, and it's an institution and an idea that's evolved over time. One thing that so many people struggle with when I talk to financial advisors and their clients is stopping doing something that was very meaningful to them. I mean, it is somewhat of a peculiar idea, given how much work matters to people, that what you do for 40 plus years is try to save enough money so that you stop doing what's meaningful to you. Now, that's the way the system is set up, and folks do get tired and they want to do other things later in life, and they should, and that's fantastic. But we have to think, of retirement not just as a goal and not just as a good thing, but as a potential loss, because it means that you're going to be moving on from things that might have been very, very important to you. And we do find sort of depression and loneliness in seniors, in part because what they had been doing most of their life was no longer part of them, and they need to replace that with something. It's really important to be thinking about that ahead of time, as opposed to in the moment when you might feel like you don't have the time or resources or options that you might otherwise.
Yeah. And there's the flip side. It can be a huge renewal. I mean, people can just get tired of what they were doing, and the opportunity, especially if they're financially independent, the opportunity to suddenly embrace new skills, new places, new travels, new friends, new opportunities that possibly the time, because of the time constraints before,
right,
they now can then take on.
Renewal is a great word, yeah. But just listening to the words you just spoke, you could apply that to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There are always times for renewal, and sometimes it's just not practically possible. But the mindset that, okay, I'm at that next stage where I'm going to do fill in the blank, something that's important to you or your family or community, that's great. And clearly, sort of the traditional workflow where we stop working at whatever the age is, 60, 65 in the US is typical. We can use that as an opportunity for renewal, but it doesn't have to be, I think, the one-time event that the industry generally has put it out to be, meaning, okay, you got to go through all this stuff in terms of working your butt off and maybe not liking your job and dealing with your kids and all the noise of daily life, and then at some point you get to the finish line and you cross it and you raise your arms and you say victory. It actually doesn't work that way. What happens in a lot of financial planning conversations is that a couple, they go to their financial planner, they're 62 years old, the planner says you've done everything right, you've got some money to travel, to be charitable, to help out the kids or the grandkids, and what the couple says, and it's usually the man, is, well, what's next? Because they're not just going to sit around. No. So it's an opportunity for renewal, but not one that everyone takes advantage of. No. And and that's where possibly help from a planner or someone who's more interested in maybe them as people rather than their money is an important thing. Yeah, no, critically important, because if the planner is only focused on generating fees from an investment portfolio, even, and assuming that planner is ethical and a good person and has the client's, best interests in mind, incentives matter. So it's important to think through, like, what is your planner getting out of this conversation or this business relationship, because that can vary from one type of practice to another. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Brian. The book, The Geometry of Wealth, I mean, as I say, I'm 2/3 of the way through. I'm listening in the car all the way here, and I'll be probably finishing it on the way back this evening, down to Dorset from Birmingham. Great. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I highly recommend
people read it or listen to it or whatever, however they get access to it. I'll put the show notes in where they can get it on Amazon and that type of thing. Where could people find out more about your work and about you?
Yeah, sure. So, Amazon seems to be the one bookstore left in the world. That's where you can buy the book. I have a website, shapingwealth.com, and I also work for an investment firm, Magnetar. So at magnetar.com, I'm producing white papers on investment strategy, and they can find information there.
Great. And I know you're on Twitter, so which is where I connected with you. So I'll put those links in. And I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to find out more about Brian's books and the great work he's doing, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll also find links to the various resources Brian mentioned. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please do leave a review on iTunes or your preferred podcast player to help more people like you discover us. It really does help. And if you've not yet subscribed, then you can do so on our website, theretirementcafe.co.uk, or on your preferred podcast player. So until next time, this is Justin King helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.